you'll all know this for 1 minute. Amazing grace, how sweet the sound that so I once was lost, but now I'm found. Was blind, but now I see. Amazing grace, how sweet the sound that saved a soul like me. I was lost, but now I'm found in this amazing grace. It's bringing our hands together to our hearts once again, acknowledging the one in all as we chant 3 arms together and Shanti, 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 to be peaceful. Shanti, Shanti, Shanti. Namaste, have a nice day, just this day. Thank you so much. Thank you.
I'm here to welcome you to Just This Day, which is in its 9th year. And this year is probably the most exciting of the years because we are live streaming it. I've always found the concept of space as somewhere that we're not divided as a most inspiring one. And it made me think to myself that when you're in St. Martin in the Fields, or if you're in Dubai or Singapore, or Australia, Amsterdam, Argentina, Buenos Aires, wherever you are, whatever time it is, we're sharing a single space, and the name of that space is now. Now that space can be as special as you wish it to be, and I hope that during this morning the speakers and the experience given here will give you some idea of what a magical space it is. Thank you very much for coming and for joining us in the ether.
Yes, I'm recording again. Yeah, I got that.
After our singing, we're going to begin with just 3 minutes of complete silence, and that sort of silence will be held by a bell at the beginning of the 3 minutes and a bell at the end. told my brother to listen, healing. My brother bought the bowl back for me here in the centre of London, where I live next to this church. I listened to the end of the ring. I heard the bell that for 15 years called me to pray, disturbed my busyness, brought me to the church in order to centre my heart and my mind upon God. I listened. I heard the bell, the single bell that rings in this church every morning at 8:25, bringing me and a group of homeless people and a group of clergy and friends to pray the psalms and pray the offices of the church, disturbs the busyness of our lives, calling us back to centre our hearts upon God. I listened to the sound of the bell beyond the sirens of this busy square. I listened beyond the beatbox and the disco man who plays tunes in Trafalgar Square and the crowds that fall out of the pub at night and the buskers that sing. I listened. I listened beyond the anxieties of our world at this time, beyond and deeper than the anxieties of fear and war and terrorism and the non-stop news every minute of the hour telling us to be afraid. I listened beyond my own anxieties and fears and stresses of the day. And I listened into silence, the silence to which you are called today, a silence in which we can meet, the still point of our turning world, the place where each of us can become attentive attentive to the beauty of this building in which we are sitting, which was made and created for the glory of God. Of the world in which we live, with its color, with its infinite variety, attentive to one another, those who are strangers, this now, attentive and dependent upon the mystery of life, each one of us mortal, each one of us called to understand the meaning of that mortality. And here in this church in Trafalgar Square, attentive to God, to the Christ expressed in the window behind me, stretching out and bringing light and hope, outstretched hands and a call which calls us into a peace greater than all human understanding. I listened to the sound of a singing bowl, and I heard the silence which makes me attentive to the meaning of my life. Today we have all been called by this wonderful day to come to this church, to become in that silence attentive to our world and attentive to one another. It's my great pleasure and privilege as the Associate Vicar here of this church on the edge of London meditation, we may find a unity and a peace greater than all human understanding. Thank you to all those from Just This Day who have organized this day for us. Thank you, all those who are participating and leading. Thank you especially to all those who will come and share this silence. And our hope and our prayer is that we can find a wisdom in that silence which is so much greater than all the conflict and the brutality of our world. Let us pray. Lead us, Lord God, this day from death to new life, from darkness to light, from the tumult of discord to the harmony of hope. Lead us, Lord, from war to peace. Let that peace fill our minds, fill our hearts, fill our lives, fill the lives of those who sit side by side with us. Fill this church, fill this city, fill this nation, fill this world. And today, as we come searching for that peace, we pray most especially for the situation in Syria, throughout the Middle East, the conflict that we have heard so much about between Turkey and Russia over the last 24 hours, and all those longing to find that place of sanctuary, that place of peace, that place of quietness. Amen. Now it gives me great pleasure to introduce for you Isabel Gauthier, who's going to be leading us in meditation and in silence.
This is an invitation to come into sweet silence. There's silence that comes when there's death, and there's silence that comes when there's emptiness, but I'll invite you to a sweet silence experience. You can keep your eyes open if you want, just find a point of focus. If you close them, see a light in front of you. Allow the world around you and what you see and what you hear to just settle down like dust on the ground. The world exists and the world will continue to turn even though we meditate and we turn our attention within. And allowing your breath and your body to settle into stillness, physical stillness. Just turn your mind within. Your mind is the space where thoughts are created before the words are spoken. And a mind that is stable and clear would allow for the thoughts that give words and actions that we wish to see in the world around us to emerge. When our minds have been a space of open door without anything, let's fill it with the sweet silence that it's craving for. Beyond the questions, beyond the fears and desires and attachments of this physical world. Let's go where the self feels most comfortable. Beyond this body, the self is energy. And the one that thinks is a conscious being. And that conscious being is innately very beautiful and pure and powerful. Given the chance, the soul will always give birth to pure, peaceful, and loving thoughts. Let's give it a chance. Go beyond the thoughts that I am a soul and experience it now. I am a being of peace. I've come into this body to express myself, but when given a chance, my creation, my thoughts, my feelings, and my words will always be beautiful. I may have lost the power to stay within that beauty and to stay within that peace, but there's one soul that has never lost that power. So from the experience that I am a soul, let's travel with our minds to a world of light beyond time and space, where I can be with God. God also is a beautiful, forever powerful, and forever loving. And in his heart, every single soul in the world have a space. Let's imagine now being in the heart of God, not as a physical being, but as a soul, the child of God. Imagine being surrounded with a love that doesn't know your name, that doesn't know your race, that doesn't even know your religion, but does know you, the soul, more than you know yourself. A love that will heal you and empower you. Empower the most beautiful, the most giving part, you, the soul. Go beyond experiencing the words or holding the thoughts. Experience now. I am a soul. And my Father, the Supreme Soul, holds me in his heart, fully and see every single soul on the planet as my brother and sister. And it is by empowering them to hold the awareness of their beauty and their eternity that we can imagine new decisions to be made, new words to be spoken, not word that hurts or divide, but words that unite. It starts in the mind, but first, the creator of the thoughts and the words, the soul, the child of God. Let's hold that silence, that sweet silence, for a few moments. and this awareness. Now I'll invite you to come back to the awareness of where you are now and maybe turn towards the person beside you. But don't come into words and don't come into thoughts. Just you, the soul, the silent being, appreciating the beauty of the one beside you with a smile from the mind. If I can see the other as they are truly, I remove the chance to have the noises of differences of opinion and criticism divide us. The other one beside you is also a beautiful being, a child of God. Shanti.
A very warm welcome to you all. Is this working? You can hear me? Can't hear. A very warm welcome to you all. That's warmer, isn't it? We're now moving to the part of the program which will focus on word and silence. And the first thing I'd like to do is to remind you to avoid embarrassment by making sure that your mobile phones are set to silence. This session of word and silence will run until just after 12 o'clock, with 3-minute silences on the hour that we'll all observe. And our thanks are to St. Martin's in the Field clergy for welcoming us into their space to hold this event. And I shall thank more specifically later. But now I won't take up long with introducing our first speaker, who is Dr. David Horan from Trinity College Dublin, where he works in the Trinity Plato Center. He's very modest about his scientific background, but the last 12 years he's brought all that meticulous intelligence to bear on working towards a new translation of the dialogues of Plato. So, David, we are in your hands. Thank you.
Good. Well, good morning. I'm very honored to be invited to speak here at this event. The question which appears on your program is, why are stillness and silence so important? And I'd like to explore this question in what will ultimately be a practical manner, with an approach which I believe corresponds with the spirit of inquiry which you will find in the works of Plato and in the works of Plotinus, who arrives on the scene some 500 years after Plato. And so I will draw upon what I consider to be their approach, with an approach based on silence, which I will suggest to you does appear with great force and great importance in the works of Plato, and certainly can't be missed in the works of Plotinus. But I'd like to begin just by telling you a very simple story which gives some of the background to what I want to say. The story refers to a religion class which I was in Ireland, and I was aged about 10. Well, we've been taught by a brother who's a member of a religious order, and the brother was talking about the soul. The word soul has been mentioned a number of times this morning, but this brother was talking about the soul. And he told us that he had been in conversation with a surgeon, and this surgeon told him that there is no such thing as soul. The surgeon said, "I have been operating upon bodies all of my life. I am an experienced and eminent surgeon, and never, ever, as I operated upon those bodies, have I come across soul." Now, the brother was obviously aghast at this, particularly aghast at the fact that such an intelligent, eminent man would doubt one of the fundamental truths of religion. All he said to us was, of course he didn't find the soul is invisible. He then told us that we should pray, that we would have faith in these truths of religion and not come to doubt them in the way that the eminent surgeon had come to doubt them. For some reason, that story has stayed with me ever since. For some reason, I found the story exciting, but I'm ultimately not sure why it stayed with me. We had a religious upbringing in which you were not normally introduced to any views which went counter to the truths of our own religion. Here is one case where I was introduced to a doctrine which went counter to the truths of the religion I was being taught. Perhaps that's why it stood in my mind. But I'm not sure that that's really why it has stuck in my mind and has stayed with me in that way. I think what excited me as well was that it opened up philosophic inquiry. It opened up exploration of truth. It opened up the possibility that doubt could be replaced with certainty and knowledge. What really attracted me to science was just that. There was doubt, there was confusion. Does the truth lie here? Does the truth lie there? And then suddenly there's a discovery and the doubt is cleared. But the process does not end and we keep moving forward. So I think I was attracted even then to a process of philosophic inquiry or scientific inquiry, whereby one proceeded through investigation, through inquiry, to certainty, where you just knew. I think that may have been why that attracted me, but I'm still standing here now, wondering why that simple story has stayed in my mind for 50 years. It may be clearer by the end of the morning. Now, going back to the story, though, the story of the brother and the surgeon, The surgeon just embodies someone who believes that the physical material world is all there is, and there is nothing beyond the physical material world. Whether that does justice to his views or not does not concern me at the moment. This man believed that the physical material world was all there is. The brother believed in something which was beyond the physical material world and did not depend upon the material world for its existence. He believed in something transcendent. And to this day, there are people who believe that the material physical world is all there is, and there are people who believe there is something beyond it. That was so even in Plato's time. If we go back to Plato and Plotinus, even in Plato's time, there were those who said, all of these Athenians go around talking about gods, but what if there are no gods? Even in the circle around Socrates, there were people who expressed views of that nature, that the physical is ultimate. There may be things like mind, there may even be things like love, but they're just products of the physical, and there's nothing beyond the physical. Plato was very, very well aware of this controversy. And Plato writes about it in one particular dialogue in very dramatic terms. There was a myth well known to the Athenians of Plato's time 2,500 years ago, a story that they told of a battle between the gods and the giants for supremacy. The gods did battle with the giants, and this battle of the gods and the giants is depicted again and again and again on Greek art. And on the sculptures on the Parthenon, there are scenes of this battle of gods and giants. Of course, as you would expect, the gods won. They won with the help of a man, Heracles. They needed the help of a human being so that they could win. In the story that every Athenian of Plato's time would have known 2,500 years ago, the gods win and the battle ends. But Plato, in a very famous passage of one of his writings, says, "The battle ever rages." This battle has not ended. This battle between those who believe that the only reality is physical and there is no reality other than the physical on the one side, and those who believe that there is something transcendent, something which is totally independent of the physical and the material and does not depend upon the physical and the material in order to exist. This battle ever rages according to Plato. It goes on and on and on. We can certainly see it most evidently in debates which rage around us today, out there, as we might say. But we also might see it within ourselves, a part of us which really does know that there is something beyond the physical. But sometimes that part of us which knows there is something beyond the physical and knows there's something transcendent can lose the battle to another part of us which thinks, perhaps even for a short time, well, the only reality is the physical. What am I? I'm this. I'm a physical body, and it'll die, and that'll be the end of me. So that battle, which Plato speaks of as going on eternally, I think we can even recognize within ourselves. But the question is, how may this be resolved? If I go back to the brother who educated me just was very grateful that he believed the immortal, glad that he was not like the who was an immortal. We find a more kindness than a call to have faith. Plato and Plotinus offer us a way in which we can know that there is something beyond the material world, something which entirely transcends the material world, which is not touched in any way by the material world, and which we as human beings can have access to. Those of you who have read Plato tackle the very issues I'm discussing now. The question of whether there is something beyond the physical and the material, something which transcends them and is not affected in any way by what happens in this material world, and something which human beings can access. Plato puts forward, let's call them logical philosophical arguments with which we are quite familiar, being familiar with logical philosophical arguments, arguments which show that there is something beyond the physical. Very famously, in the Phaedo, his dialogue, which presents Socrates on the last day of his life, Socrates proves that there is a soul of each person, and that soul is immortal and will continue after the body of the person falls. However, there's an interesting aspect of the human psyche that's fully aware. Some follow logic, say yes at every stage, somehow or other be left in the same place that we were when it started. It can move us not. So you might try another dialogue. You might read the same dialogue again, thinking you might have missed something. Somehow or other, the words and the structured arguments don't always bring about in our being the very recognition that they're pointing us to, the very recognition which we crave, as was explained by the person who spoke before me. So, is Plato unaware of this? Is this a point he has missed? Well, I'm going to say a definitive no. And I'll just talk again about that dialogue, the Phaedo, the dialogue which captures the last day of Socrates' life. In that dialogue, there are periods of silence. Their duration is unspecified. I sometimes ask people, when it says here there was silence for some time, for how long do you think that silence lasted? Some say, 5 minutes. Some get very excited and say maybe 10. I just ask, how do you know it wasn't 2 hours? They've no answer to it. 2 hours. Phaedo. There is one question put to Socrates, which he says is the most difficult and challenging question put at that gathering. Before Socrates answers that question, he falls quiet. It's specifically stated by Plato that before Socrates turns his mind to the great question, the vast question. He falls quiet. Doing what? In this same dialogue, the Phaedo, Socrates explains what philosophy asks of us, what philosophy calls us towards. And when he explains in the Phaedo what philosophy calls us towards, he does not say that it calls us towards wordy, structured arguments. I have the words which he uses here. I've adjusted them slightly so that they represent a call to us. A call by philosophy, as understood by Socrates. A call to us. And I would like to ask us just to follow this guideline, this directions, this call from philosophy just now in silence. And I'll just give you the words. Philosophy persuades you to withdraw from the senses and use them only as much as necessary. Collect and gather yourself into yourself. Trust nothing except your own self and what you can cognize just by yourself about things that are just by themselves. So we come now to the period of silence which was set for 11 o'clock, and I'll just read to you those words once more, and then we just be still and quiet with wherever those words lead us to. Philosophy persuades you to withdraw from the senses. Use them only as much as necessary. Collect and gather yourself into yourself. Trust nothing except your own self. And what you can cognize just by yourself about things that are just by themselves. So thank you. And I would just conclude by saying that it is a great pity that that aspect of approach to philosophy, through stillness and silence, is missed and overlooked in the writings of Plato. Plotinus, who came 500 years after Plato, did not miss it. And he knew that for true philosophy and for the true search, you must go beyond the words. Thank you.
Thank you very much indeed, David. There will be an opportunity to ask questions after the second speaker, and I'm sure that David will be willing to tell us a little bit more about Plotinus in that period. But any question that comes to your mind, you will be able to ask. Now I would like to invite Laura Hyde to come and address us. Laura's lifelong love has been education and the care not only of children, guiding them to discover their full potential, but also of the teachers who teach them. And it's been my privilege to know Laura in this capacity for many years, both as parent of girls in her care and teaching under her for some years as well. So, without further ado, Laura, would you like to address us?
Thank you, Valerie. And thank you, Liz, for the invitation to be here. It really is a very special day and lovely to be in this company. Move this slightly. That's fine, thank you. Thank you. Well, I'd like to begin by giving a little consideration to the title of this morning's event, Silence and the Word. Our spiritual traditions have, in various ways throughout history, explained that what we believe as created for all dimensions and spiritual arise from a realm which is prior to that which is created. This is often described as unseen, formless, or unmanifest. Although it is ultimately impossible to describe the unmanifest, there is a reflection of its quality in what we call silence or stillness. When, for example, we listen and we allow attention to expand extensively to the great silence in which all sound and form arise, and into which they return, we get a sense of the relationship between the form and the formless, sound and silence. There is no opposition between movement and stillness, sound and silence. A lovely analogy, which we will consider a little later, is the wave and the ocean. The wave appears to be separate, a separate form and movement, with independent existence, but it is not different from or separate from the ocean. The depth of the ocean is still, the wave is in frantic movement, but it is the self-same ocean. So if we turn now to the concept of the word as it appears in the title, it goes without saying that this is a huge subject, about which great philosophers have. I would like to explain the context in which I have placed this concept for the purposes of this talk. It can be taken During this talk, I will consider how education might introduce the human being to a practical understanding of the relationship between silence and the word, the unmanifest and the manifest, and how this may enhance the quality of life. When I embarked upon the writing of this talk, I encountered a familiar, disconcerting experience, a void, who's confirming that one should never have agreed to speak. Fortunately, after a lengthy period of waiting, a chink of light usually appears, and on this occasion it delivered this profound and well-known declaration by Kabir. I laugh when I hear that the fish in the ocean is thirsty. I would like to consider the meaning of this. Somewhere between birth and the age of 3, an impression of a separate existence begins to emerge. With this feeling of separation comes an existential pain, which is accompanied by fear and a longing to return to wholeness, to union, to return home. In the impression of separation, there is an innate sense of loss, of incompletion, and a thirst for ultimate satisfaction arises. This is a common experience, which nature seems to have in its pattern, and our experience of the world consolidates and encourages it. As language develops, we learn to conceive of an ego, which is called me, and everything else becomes you. Duality comes into existence. Subject and object are born, and this illusion projects itself upon all that is seen and experienced. From this foundation, education, parenting, and the world in general serve efficiently to confirm the impression that I need to improve, progress, become, and acquire. Bad, lovable, unlovable, clever, stupid, and so on, is determined through the mirror of the world, the judgments of the people we encounter, and the activities upon which we engage. This renders the so-called individual vulnerable, because the inherent core feeling of inadequacy seeks comfort and resolution in its dealings with a world which now appears threatening. So a mask is created, the persona or personality, which presents a seeming self to the world. In infancy, there is simply the impression of the all-encompassing love of a parent. This is all that there is. There is no experiencer. However, once there is the feeling of a separate identity and the sense of lack which accompanies it, the mirror of relationship of other people is needed to confirm my worth, to confirm that I am lovable. In addition, the world introduces the apparent separate self to the idea that there are actions which are good and actions which are bad. Furthermore, it appears that we are associated with these results of action, so we are seen to be embroiled in the inevitable tyranny of doing and becoming. We feel ourselves to be cast out from the all-embracing presence of love, which is, by nature, unconditional and immutable. As Richard Rohr put it, we know ourselves in the security of those who hold us and gaze upon us. It's not heard or seen or thought, it's felt. That's the original knowing. My mother's eyes tell me I'm the beloved. But when I begin to see myself through eyes that compare, judge, and dismiss, then the division begins, and conscious spirituality is needed, and always bringing us back to experience. Care for others. The key to allowing another human being to flourish is to recognize that the person, the essence of that person, is pure, perfect, and complete. As the Old Testament declares, we are made in the image of God. Nature is in a state of flux, but the spirit of man is divine and unchanging. The descriptors we use here may vary, but it is true to say that a parent's love for its child is like this. The love is unconditional. When we fall in love, it is the same. We adore the perfect essence of the so-called other. Vision is far from the eyes of those who care is of features, good and bad, all this process that really is. And so to turn to Kabir, that the very is itself not to tell us what to do, but to help us to see who we are. The self we come to know through its grace is not a separate, isolated little ego self clinging to its memories, desires, and fears. It is a field of consciousness, similar to and indivisible from the consciousness of the God, of cosmic and biblical revelation alike, the one great I am. Arising from this perspective is an important principle to understand. The illusory sense that we are a separate individual ego self is largely consolidated by thinking. And in the West, we have been taken over by its seeming importance. Descartes' famous phrase, cognito ergo sum, I think, therefore I am, was considered to be a revolutionary insight which ushered in the so-called Enlightenment. Many of us would argue it was hugely misleading. There is no doubt that the isolated state of the individual is the cause of much suffering, whether our perspective is concern for the well-being of the microcosm or of the macrocosm. Involvement in private thought, which is centered on me, is a significant cause of isolation and suffering. The ocean, to a realm which is aware of the waves buffeting about on the surface, but dwells in the quiet and stillness of the deep, our perspective changes radically. The waves may still be turbulent and in vigorous movement, but they're known as waves, within the field of awareness, within our consciousness, which is limitless and all-embracing. This is unconditional love, in which everything which is simply comes to pass. As Richard Rohr puts it, in contemplation, we move to a different space where we see the illusion of separateness. In addition to the deluding and isolating effects of me-centered thought, there is one other feature which is central to understanding the nature of release from the confines of separation. In me-centered thought, attention is focused and absorbed in an imagined world, woven by words, memories, and future speculation. When we really pay attention to what is presently taking place, there is no sense of a separate self. This is a simple but remarkably profound and practical truth. Lawrence Freeman comments on this. He says, "Stillness is the condition of unself-centered attention. It is inherently compassionate and agile. We are silent whenever we pay attention. We pay attention when there is no I thought, no self-reflective consciousness, no thought that we are the observer. This attention is the essence of prayer. Whenever we are in this state, we are in prayer, whether we are in church or supermarket or making money. When we listen, we return to silence. How can education help to support the awakening to this forgotten truth? This is a question far removed from the common concerns of our educational systems. Nevertheless, the first step must surely be to recognize this larger perspective, which understands something about the real nature of fulfillment. Our vision is commonly confined to materialistic notions of success, which are necessarily fear-driven and productive of excessive measures of anxiety in our young people. The me-centered culture to which the negative aspects of the digital world subject them is hugely damaging. Obsessive concern with physical appearance, cyberbullying, and critical measures of isolation are all the result of an instrument which claims to bring people together. Mental illness, depression, and self-harming are the fruits of its destructive influence. In addition, as we know only too well, our young people, amongst themselves and within families, who are all too often immersed in digital paraphernalia. Face-to-face, heart-to-heart communication, which every soul longs for, is hard to find. Relationships are superficial, fleeting, and full of careless words. True communication is attentive. It comes from the heart, which is resting in love, ready only to receive, empty in the silence from which everything arises. One of the greatest problems which has arisen from excessive use of technology is the lack of ability to focus. Without the power of sustained attention, nothing of real worth in human endeavor is likely to be possible. Real learning, depth of understanding, creativity, artistic skill, and power of communication all depend upon the ability to apply sustained attention. Perhaps even more important is that a distracted state of attention, which is always flitting superficially from one sensation to another, renders the human instrument increasingly insensitive to the condition of another. This has produced a growing harshness, a lack of empathy and kindness, which is truly alarming. If we cannot see the needs of another or feel their pain, we lose our very humanity. So, it becomes increasingly obvious that from all perspectives, in order to meet the needs of young people today, access to deep, focused quiet is vital. Their spiritual, emotional, mental, and physical welfare depend upon it. At the St. James Schools, meditation and quiet time have been a central part of the educational program since the foundation of the schools 40 years ago. Until the last decade, such practices were considered to be extremely weird and New Age. However, concern for the mental and emotional health of young people has caused a powerful wave of interest in the value of meditative practice, and mindfulness has become, in schools, the essence of what is generally meant and understood to be mindful living has two aspects. The first is the simple discipline of living in the present, rather than allowing the attention to get immersed in thought and imagining. The second aspect is meditative in nature. This involves sitting quietly and bringing the body, mind, and senses into focus in the present. This in itself is refreshing, in that it serves to release the commonly distracted condition from its confined awareness into a more expansive consciousness. There is an additional and perhaps more subtle principle which is introduced in this context. Once attention is focused in the present, people are asked to appreciate the self-evident truth that the various features of physical, mental, or emotional experience appear and disappear within awareness. Awareness remains constant. Impressions and forms of experience come to pass. These experiences have a variety of qualitative impacts which come and go. The subtle distinction between unchanging awareness and the changing forms of experience is very important. It lends an understanding which allows a person to enjoy greater stability and ease in meeting the ever-changing conditions of life. For those concerned with addressing the well-being of children, adolescents, or adults, this is of major significance, for it goes to the heart of the matter. At St. James, we have practiced this simple approach through offering a 2-minute pause before and after activities. This regular whole school practice provides a huge strength to the academic, emotional, physical, and creative life of pupils. It opens the door to discovering the wealth of all that life offers. With the additional support of meditation, practiced for longer periods at the start and end of every day, a person of any age can come to appreciate the enormous gift of the power of attention, which again enriches every aspect of life. Ultimately, contemplative or meditative practice may offer direct experience of that which transcends the confines of mind. Educationally, it is important to offer a young person the means to open his or her experience to deeper levels of understanding. As mentioned earlier, this will depend upon the power to attend. On this point, Simone Weil says, "Attention consists of suspending our thought, leaving it detached, empty, and ready to be penetrated by the object." Little is said nowadays about the importance of insight or revelation. Humanity has depended throughout history on the availability of extraordinary wisdom or understanding, which is revealed through insight and revelation. More often than not, such occurrences come spontaneously and unexpectedly. But when they do appear, the authority of the knowledge revealed is absolute and usually universal in character. It is described as coming seemingly from another place, another source. This means that it is recognized that the revealed understanding was not initiated by the so-called individual, neither did it arise from within its confines of effort, prior experience, or knowledge. As we know, it has often been the case that such knowledge may well serve not only to direct a person's life, but invariably it may be of signal use to humanity as a whole. In this respect, it is useful to acknowledge, as the saying goes, if God wants to send us a message, it's not helpful if he finds us otherwise engaged. In order to be receptive to the unexpected appearance of higher knowledge, the channels of communication must be open. This means that the person needs to be acquainted with a condition of simple, receptive attentiveness as they move through life. Mental preoccupation is problematic, for it removes the mind and heart from the gift of the present. The other great obstacle is arrogance, the presumption of knowing or being over-opinionated. If we think we have sorted everything out at any level, and particularly spiritually, the door will be shut. The most propitious condition is to live in the simplicity of not knowing and wait for knowledge to appear when and if it is necessary. Whether or not our children's lives are to be graced by revealed knowledge is not in our hands. What we can offer them is the strength which comes from access to stillness and the capacity to engage in activity with simplicity and full attention. It is obvious that when young people who have been trained in this way meet challenging situations, they draw upon deeper resources. It is wonderful to see the enhanced capacity of sustained attention in academic rigor or the sensitive perception which lends a brilliance and beauty to creative artistic pursuits. The power of all creativity rests in the ability to attend. We also need to teach them how to make full use of the power of speech. When these pupils learn the art of public speaking, they discover the capacity to speak and think with clarity, because they have learnt that all good speech depends upon sustained listening. Words arise from the stillness of the unformed and return to it. When young people connect with this silence as they speak, their words are enlivened and real communication takes place. When all is said and done, the human being is seeking to love and to be loved. Unless a young person is taught that ultimate fulfillment is found in giving rather than taking, that a selfish, me-centered life is a miserable life, and a life which gives ever more expansively leads to happiness, he or she will be entirely at the mercy of the slings and arrows of outrageous fortune. In summary, these essential principles can be passed on to young people as they move towards adulthood. Attending always to the reality of the human being, a teacher can guide the pupil to discover the power of attention, the beauty of silence, and the simple truth that service is the secret to a happy life. In this way, schools can foster in their pupils the conditions and understanding through which life, in all its splendor, may flourish. The world is facing challenging times. The growth of violence, fear, hatred, division, and isolation beckon the need to access deeper resources of the human spirit. And the first question to address in all its simplicity is, who am I? That most ancient of philosophic inquiries. And once the illusion of separation is dispelled, it is seen that the ocean of unconditional love is one, it is all and everything. It is complete. It always was complete and one, and always will be complete and one. Thank you for your attention.
Thank you very much, Laura Hyde. And may I now invite David to come back to the platform, because now is the opportunity for all of you to make this morning complete by asking questions of the speakers to expand the most thought-provoking things they've put before us. I've certainly found it deeply moving to hear what has been said, and I'm sure that there are things you would like to pursue. There are 2 microphones that will be moving around the hall for your benefit, and if you would raise your hand if you have a question, then one of the microphones will come to you. So I now surrender mine.
Thank you very much. Well, thank you, David and Laura. How many teachers teaching today of educational psychologists? And I can tell you that really warmed my heart. But why don't we have teachers being trained in spiritual teaching first?
Yes, I sympathize with the content of your question, but in a way I think there is a turn in this direction, and certainly the interest in mindfulness, as it is called, is an expression of that recognition that the spiritual dimension in education needs to be acknowledged. Words are sensitive, and the word spiritual is not an easy word to use. It often, if it's going to be spoken, no sooner has it entered the air than it is met with skepticism or rejection. So people choose their words carefully. But there is a recognition that there is a deeper dimension to embrace, if for no other reason than, as I mentioned in my talk, to give greater ease and peace to the troubled emotional condition of young people today.
Well, while people are here's a question.
Is it on? Could
Hyde.
you say something about leadership in, let's say, in the Western world, and stillness, and how does this come over and engender trust and attention and a bigger vision in life, which I would say we probably are in need of, always have been in need of, and always will be in need of. Could you say something about leadership in the context of what you've been talking about?
Was this question directed to Mrs. Hyde or Dr. Warren? Both. Would you both like to deal with it briefly?
It's a huge question, and it's very, very important to Plato. Very famously, in the Republic, he talks about philosopher kings. And he says that until philosophers become kings, or the kings and princes of this world are imbued with the spirit and power of philosophy, states will have no rest from their evils, nor will the people within them. That's a slight paraphrase. I think this is absolutely correct, and I think we just need to be perhaps a bit less literal as to what's meant by philosopher kings. And as I understand it, and it would be very interesting to hear what other people have to say, but that's not our format. But as I understand it, the essence of this is that the people are guided by the truly philosophic, and the vision of a leader comes from the truly philosophic. Based on what I said earlier, and based on what Mrs. Hyde has said, I think that only comes in stillness and silence. Without stillness and silence, all that happens to us is the same ideas that we've always had and have always been in the grip of keep circulating round and round and round in our heads, and we can't get free of them. So there's no vision and there's no inspiration. And leadership without vision and inspiration is not true leadership. And I think the place to turn for the inspiration of the true leader is philosophy. And I think it's philosophy properly understood as not a philosophy whereby you accumulate more and more ideas, but a philosophy whereby you empty yourself of ideas and are open to inquire again, as Mrs. Hyde said. Not knowing. Begin from not knowing. Then let the knowledge begin to enter. Let the inquiry begin to unfold. And then I think with that we will have true vision and we will have true leaders. And I'd go so far as to say quite dramatically, without it we haven't a hope. Thank you.
Yes, obviously a very key question. I don't really have much more to say than what David spoke so beautifully in his answer, except this simple principle which he touched on, that the essence of the best leadership is that the so-called person recognizes their instrumentality and takes as the authority the divine source or unlimited consciousness, however one wishes to express it, rather than the promptings of the so-called individual perspective. So if the authority is the true authority, then what precedes will meet the need.
Mrs. Hyde, you mentioned the mother's love is all and there is no experiencer. And you also spoke about Ramana Maharshi and the, trying to fix something which is actually just an illusion. Can you speak a bit more about those two references?
The acoustics are really difficult. I hope listening to you isn't as hard. Whichever way around it is. Can you hear me all right? I think I got your question. It really is the principle I attempted to outline in the speech, which is that the mother's love is a reflection of the unconditional love, which is universal and is God. The eyes of the mother naturally see the divine beauty of the child. That inspires devotion. Nature does that beautifully. And that is the truth of the person. The mother in this context is therefore placed perfectly to allow the reality of the child to the child. Because the vision of the mother or father is naturally placed on who the child really is. And just as I described educationally, nature throws up all kinds of things that have to be dealt with appropriately. There is in the context something called good conduct and bad conduct and lawful and unlawful and so on. All that has to be learned, taught and moved through. But throughout it all, the vision is on the truth, it's on the reality. And that allows things to flourish. And Ramana Maharshi points out exactly that principle. And that in a way, all the activities of life should be anchored in that reality. Does that answer your question?
I don't see a forest of hands. If there's one here.
This is a question for Dr. David Horan. You mentioned in your talk Plotinus. Could you like to tell us a bit more about the life of Plotinus and his contribution to Western philosophy?
I'd love to. I didn't get to my Plotinus quotes or to the little section on my talk which related to Plotinus. He is born in Alexandria in Egypt in 204 AD. In other words, he arrives on the scene some 500 years after the death of Plato. He learns of Plato from in Alexandria, which by then was Greek-speaking, a Greek-speaking part of the Roman Empire. But he eventually ended up in Rome, where he lived for about 60 years and gathered around him a small group of people. He has written, and you can buy his writings, they're called Enneads, Plotinus Enneads. My inclination in answering your question is fundamentally that I will let him speak for himself by reading you his direction on prayer. I'll finish with that. Ficino says this of Plotinus: "There is no doubt but it is one and the same inspiration that has blessed the lips of both Plato and Plotinus." For Ficino, remember Ficino is 1,000 years after Plotinus more, he's 1433 to 1499. Plotinus was a second Plato. Plotinus himself says that whatever is in his writings comes from Plato. Perhaps not in the same words, but it comes from Plato, and it's not new. Hence, although he is referred to as a Neoplatonist and the founder of Neoplatonism, Plotinus himself, based on his own words, would not accept that appellation. He said, there is nothing new here. You asked me to talk about his influence. I'll just mention one aspect of his influence, given where we're gathered in a church. Augustine, St. Augustine of Hippo, read Plotinus. He describes it in his Confessions, and extraordinarily, telling you something about Plotinus and something about Augustine, when he hears Plotinus' words, he hears John's Gospel. And he says, what I heard in the writings of Plotinus was, in the beginning was the Word, and the Word was with God, and the Word was God. The same was in the beginning with God. So that is an extraordinary aspect of Plotinus' influence, that you find him read by one of the Latin Church Fathers in that extraordinary account in the Confessions. It is said that Augustine's consolation as he was in his native city in Africa, waiting for the barbarians to invade and ransack the city, his consolation was a phrase from Plotinus. That's recounted by Augustine's own biographer. Your bigger question as to the influence of Plotinus, I think, may have to wait for another day. But it is wonderful to allow these great souls to speak for themselves. And in a church like this, most appropriate to hear Plotinus and what he has to say on prayer. It's very short, and it's simplest just to follow the directions as he gives them to us. And I'll read them now. Again, the prayer is before Plotinus enters upon the consideration of a vast philosophic question. He says this: let us speak of it in this way. First, invoking God himself, not in spoken words, but stretching ourselves out with our soul into prayer to him. Able in this way to pray alone, to him alone.
It is much lifted, what has been said. However, my mind is still stuck with the idea, which has been through our Western education for so long and so embedded as a belief, that I am what I think and therefore I am always interested in what other people might be saying or might be believing. But still, if this idea, I am, therefore I think, is misleading, then would either of the speakers give me another mantra for the mind?
Could we ask for the essence of the question again, please? Because the acoustics are against us. The last thing that you said.
The essence is this: the mind is stuck with the belief that I am what I think what I am. I am what I think. Is there a plausible alternative?
I like the last bit of the question, is there a feasible alternative? Well, really, I'm sorry to go back again to what was said earlier, that in a way that is the mechanical situation for us all, that we take what the mind presents as the reality about ourselves. So the only way that is broken is by direct experience that makes it self-evident, literally, that what is taking place in the field of the mind is seen within my awareness. The only way that is made true experientially is in a practice of some kind which we call stillness or meditation, so that it becomes literally self-evident that I see the field of, in the field of my awareness, I see the content of thought, or as we call it, mind. In that, there is then absolute clarity that I am free and not the content of thought. You couldn't solve the problem by putting a different idea in, because it would only be another idea.
I think we have time for one more question. Oh, two if they're very quick.
Switched on. I remember many years ago when I first became interested in meditation, saying something about it to a friend who professed to be a Christian. And the answer that I got was that prayer is good, but meditation is evil. And this was what he had been told by some Christian teacher, was that meditation was of the devil. How do you answer such a person?
Yes. Well, you could just tell them that it's not. To be sympathetic to them, they're probably saying that because they've heard it from someone else, from some other source. The theme of what pretty well everyone has said this morning is that it's only by recourse to our own direct experience that we know whether such and such is so or such and such is not so. The same will apply to meditation. But there's something about this whole business of being asked a difficult question like that, and I do sympathize with you. It is a real situation dramatized through the question of meditation. But a viewpoint is put to you which you do not accept and which the person has taken the trouble to put to you. This is the essence of what goes on in the Socratic dialogues. And what Socrates does again and again and again is he says, he will not tell the person that they're wrong. He sometimes will say to the person, I don't agree. Sometimes he doesn't even do that. He will say, we should investigate this together. That is very, very hard to do. In that situation, what would be asked of you would be this. You would have to say to that person, if you are right, I will stop. But you just need to show me that you are right. Because you're just telling me that it is demonic. It doesn't help me. And me just telling you that it's not doesn't help you. If we're serious about this, and this is to go beyond the level of a chat, then we need to investigate this together. That's what Socrates would do. But it's very, very hard to do, because the first thing you, as a person, have to do is back down somewhat from your own stance. And I would find the confrontation as difficult as you find it. But if given what I love, Plato and Socrates and Plotinus, I'm being directed to investigate with the person and say, if it turns out that it is indeed demonic, I'll stop. And if it turns out that it's not so, well, you might like to reconsider the fact that you have not had recourse to it. That's the best that I could do. That's what Socrates would do. So that's as far as I can take it. Thank you.
I feel we've been sitting at the feet of Socrates. Thank you for that very helpful answer, David. I'm afraid we need now to draw the questions to a close and share together another 3-minute silence, which I will start with. Now is the time to say thank you, to share our gratitude. And first, I would like to ask you to thank in the traditional way St. Martin's in the Field for making us so welcome here, as they make welcome so many other groups of people, from the homeless to concerts to many other events. And during the afternoon there will be Eucharist at 1:30, evensong at 4:30, and another short service at 6:30. If you feel moved to support the work of the church, you will find there are gift aid envelopes in front of you, and there will be a voluntary collection as you leave. I know you've already donated something, but that only covered the cost of printing of the programs. So thank you to St. Martin's. Now, I know that you would like to thank Elizabeth, who has organized this whole event, and all her team of helpers. And Elizabeth, in turn, would like to thank our two wonderful speakers who've led us on quite a journey this morning. Thank you to all of you for joining us for this part of the day. At 7 o'clock this evening, there will be more events which are described in your program at St. James Church in Piccadilly. And downstairs, there are refreshments available in the crypt if you don't have to rush off anywhere and would like to enjoy lunch in good company. Thank you very much.
To this channel, and you'll get updates about the live stream which is happening this evening, and also when we've edited the talks from this morning and the talks from this evening, we're posting them to this. So find the subscribe button, subscribe. I'm Nathan Ray. Thank you for watching. I'm gonna switch back to the other camera in just a few minutes. I'm gonna stop the live stream. Thank you for watching.